April slammed the front door so hard it rattled the windows, then screamed at her sick 8-year-old son, "I can't look at you anymore." 3 hours later, she was gone with her lover, leaving only a cruel note. What she didn't know was that her abandoned child would grow up to become her worst nightmare. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me tell you how my daughter became the coldest person I've ever known and how her own son became my greatest blessing. I'm Rose Patterson, 78 years old, and I've been raising my grandson since he was 8. 16 years ago, everything changed in one terrible afternoon that showed me exactly who my daughter really was. You know, I used to think I raised April right. Fed her vegetables, taught her manners, made sure she said please and thank you. Turns out, I forgot to teach her basic human decency, but honestly, I'm not sure that's something you can teach. Some people are just born missing that particular piece of their soul. It started when little Michael got sick, really sick. The doctors called it severe inflammatory bowel disease, which is a fancy way of saying his intestines were attacking themselves. He needed feeding tubes, collection bags, constant medical care. The sweet boy who used to run around my garden suddenly couldn't eat real food anymore. And April? Well, April acted like his illness was a personal inconvenience designed specifically to ruin her social calendar. I was folding laundry on that October afternoon when April burst into my house like a tornado in designer jeans. Her face was red with fury, and she was clutching her phone like a weapon. "Mother, I can't do this anymore," she announced, not even bothering with hello. Because why waste time on pleasantries when you're having a complete narcissistic meltdown? "Paul expects me to be a nurse, a cook, a cleaner," she continued, pacing my living room like a caged animal. "I didn't sign up for this. I'm 28 years old. I have a life to live." "Honey, Michael needs you right now," I said gently, setting down the towel I was holding. "He's scared and—" "I don't care," she shrieked. "I don't care if he's scared. I don't care if he needs me. I care about me." Her voice carried through the house, and I prayed Michael couldn't hear her from his bedroom upstairs where he was resting. Here's what April didn't tell me that day. She'd been having an affair with Marcus, some yoga instructor she'd met at her fancy wellness center. You know, because nothing says spiritual enlightenment like abandoning your sick child for a man with abs. While her son was fighting for his health, she was planning her grand escape with her lover, withdrawing money from their joint account, researching apartments in Phoenix where they could start their new life together. "April, please," I begged, watching this stranger wearing my daughter's face. "He's your son, your baby. Remember how you used to sing to him? You'd rock him for hours when he was colicky." She laughed, but it was an ugly sound that made my skin crawl. That was before he became this burden. Do you know what it's like to watch other people live normal lives while I'm stuck changing collection bags and measuring medicine? Do you know how embarrassing it is when people ask about my special needs child? I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through childhood illnesses, celebrated every milestone with, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. "When did you become so selfish?" I whispered. Her eyes turned ice cold, and for a moment I saw something that genuinely frightened me. When I realized that being a good mother was ruining my life, Mother, and I refused to let that continue. The way she said mother, like it was a curse word, like my very existence was an insult to her, told me everything I needed to know about what was coming next. The next morning, I woke up to Michael crying and Paul's frantic phone call saying April was gone. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found in that kitchen, or how a simple piece of paper would reveal the true depth of my daughter's cruelty. On the counter sat 2 envelopes, one addressed to Paul, thick with what I later learned were divorce papers and custody relinquishment documents. The other, barely a scrap of paper, had my name scrawled across it in April's hurried handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands and read the most heartless words I'd ever seen. "Take care of him. I have a life ahead of me. I can't deal with this. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I love you both." Just a cold dismissal of her responsibilities, like she was returning a defective appliance instead of abandoning her family. Paul arrived 30 minutes later, still in his wrinkled business suit from catching the earliest flight home from Denver. His face was gray with shock and exhaustion, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. She cleaned out the checking account, he said, slumping into my kitchen chair like a broken man. Left me with exactly enough to cover this month's medical bills and nothing else. I poured him coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Oh, Paul, I'm so sorry. The note she left me just says she can't pretend to love me anymore, he continued, his voice breaking. She wants a divorce and full custody of nothing. She specifically wrote that she relinquishes all parental rights and responsibilities. Like Michael is some kind of legal obligation instead of her son. That last sentence hung in the air like poison. What kind of mother doesn't just abandon a sick child, but makes sure it's legally binding so she can never be held responsible again? I kept thinking there had to be a mistake, that April would come to her senses and return. But honestly, deep down, I knew better. I'd seen the signs for months. The way she'd leave Michael with me for entire weekends, claiming she needed self-care time at expensive spas. How she'd wince when his medical equipment beeped, like the sound physically hurt her delicate sensibilities. How she'd started referring to his condition as this thing that's ruining everything, instead of using his actual diagnosis. The way she'd grown increasingly angry whenever Michael needed help with basic tasks, as if his medical needs were somehow a personal attack on her lifestyle. I can't take care of him alone, Paul admitted, and I could see the guilt eating him alive. My job requires constant travel. I'm gone 3 weeks out of every month. He needs someone who can be there, who understands his medical routine, who can handle emergencies. Rose, could you consider taking legal guardianship? I'll keep paying for everything. His medical care, his expenses, his education, everything. I just need someone who can actually be present. I looked toward the stairs where Michael was sleeping. This brave little boy who never complained, even when he was in pain, who still tried to make jokes when the doctors had to adjust his feeding tube, who apologized for being too much trouble when he needed help with his medical equipment. Of course, I said without hesitation. He's my grandson. He'll always have a home with me. Always. What I didn't say was that April's abandonment had broken something fundamental inside me too. For 38 years, I'd believed I'd raised a caring, loving daughter who would move heaven and earth for her child. Now I realized I'd been living with a beautifully packaged sociopath who saw motherhood as an inconvenience rather than a privilege. But looking at that brave little boy upstairs, I knew April had made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd thrown away pure gold for fool's gold, and she was too selfish to even realize it. 6 months after April disappeared, Michael asked me the question I'd been dreading while sitting at my kitchen table, carefully managing his feeding tube. Grandma Rose, why doesn't Mommy love me anymore? The morning sun caught his dark hair, so much like April's when she was little, and I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces all over again. This 9-year-old boy was handling his medical routine with more maturity than his 28-year-old mother had ever shown. Oh, sweetheart, I said, sitting down beside him and choosing honesty over comfortable lies. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices that have nothing to do with how wonderful you are. Your mother left because she couldn't handle being responsible for someone else's needs. That's not about you being sick. That's about her being broken inside in ways that can't be fixed. Here's what I didn't tell him. April had called me exactly once since leaving, 3 months earlier, demanding I ship her clothes and jewelry to an address in Phoenix. When I'd asked about Michael, she'd actually said, "How is what?" When I clarified, "Your son," she'd paused like she was trying to remember who I was talking about, then said, "Oh, right, he's fine, I assume. You're taking care of it. It. Not him, it." But if I wasn't sick, would she have stayed? His 9-year-old eyes were too wise, too knowing for a child who should have been worrying about homework and playground games instead of wondering why his mother found him so disposable. I thought about lying, about giving him some gentle fiction about how Mommy still loved him, but just couldn't handle his medical needs. But Michael deserved better than pretty lies. Michael, honey, your sickness didn't make your mother leave. Her selfishness did. If it hadn't been your illness, it would have been something else. You needing help with homework, wanting to play sports, asking for bedtime stories. Some people just aren't built to put anyone else's needs before their own wants. Does Daddy miss her? He asked, and I could see him processing this information with heartbreaking maturity. Paul had been incredible through everything, visiting every other weekend when he wasn't traveling, taking Michael to all his medical appointments, making sure I had everything I needed. But I could see the pain in his eyes whenever Michael mentioned his mother, the guilt that he somehow should have seen this coming, should have protected his son from this abandonment. "Your daddy loves you more than anything in this world," I said firmly. "And so do I. Sometimes families look different than we expected, but the love is just as strong. Sometimes the love is actually stronger because it's chosen, not just automatic." That afternoon, while Michael napped, I made a decision that felt both necessary and liberating. I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled down all the photo albums. Carefully, methodically, I removed every single picture of April. Not because I wanted to erase her memory, that would be impossible, but because I couldn't stand looking at her face anymore, knowing what I now knew about her character. I was replacing family photos on the mantel, putting up more pictures of Michael and Paul. When Michael appeared in the doorway, dragging his favorite blanket and watching me with those two perceptive eyes, "Grandma, are you throwing Mommy away too?" The question hit me like a physical blow, so innocent and yet so devastatingly accurate. "No, baby, I'm just putting away things that hurt to look at right now. Sometimes we need to focus on the people who choose to stay instead of the people who choose to leave." He nodded solemnly, understanding more than a 9-year-old should ever have to understand. "It's okay, Grandma Rose. She threw us away first. But we're better than she is, aren't we?" Looking at this remarkable little boy, so wise and resilient despite everything he'd been through, I realized he was absolutely right. We were better. And more importantly, we were better together. 2 years passed, and Michael was thriving under my care like a flower finally getting proper sunlight. His health had stabilized with consistent medical attention, and he'd grown into a confident, wickedly funny boy who filled my house with laughter. Then my husband Frank had his heart attack, and I discovered just how completely April had erased us from her conscience. I was in the hospital waiting room, exhausted from a 16-hour vigil when my phone rang. April's name appeared on the screen, and for one foolish moment, my heart jumped. Maybe she'd heard about Frank. Maybe she was finally ready to be human again, to show some concern for the man who'd helped raise her since she was 12. "Hello, April." "Mother." Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reading from a script. "I heard about Frank. Yes, he's in surgery now. The doctors say the next few hours are critical, but is he going to die?" The coldness in her question made me physically flinch. No concern, no sympathy, just clinical curiosity like she was asking about the weather forecast. "April, he's your stepfather. He raised you, walked you down the aisle at your wedding, helped you move into your first apartment. Is he going to die or not?" she repeated with the patience of someone humoring a particularly slow child. "We don't know yet. The surgery is complicated and he's not young anymore. Would you like me to call you when— Call me when you know for sure." Click. She hung up. I stared at my phone, literally shaking with disbelief. Frank had been more of a father to April than her biological father ever was. He'd taught her to drive, paid for her college education when her real father stopped sending child support, been there for every milestone. And this was her response to his possible death, the emotional equivalent of checking a box on a to-do list. Frank survived the surgery, but died 3 days later from complications. I called April to tell her about the funeral arrangements, hoping against hope that she'd show some spark of humanity. She listened in complete silence, then said, "I can't make it. I have plans that weekend." Plans. Her stepfather was dead, and she had unmovable plans. "April, please. I need you here. I don't want to bury him alone." "You're not alone. You have the kid." Again with calling Michael the kid, like he was some stray animal we'd randomly picked up instead of her own son. Frank's funeral was beautiful and heartbreaking. Michael, now 11 and tall for his age, stood beside me in his black suit that Paul had overnighted from Dallas, holding my hand as we said goodbye to the man who'd been like a grandfather to him. Paul flew in from Seattle to be there, because that's what family does. They show up when it matters. My neighbors came, my church friends, even Michael's doctors and nurses who'd grown to love this special boy. The funeral director said he'd rarely seen such a gathering for someone's memorial service. But not April. The daughter Frank had raised and loved was too busy with her plans to say goodbye to the man who'd been there for every important moment of her life until she decided to disappear. After everyone left, Michael and I sat in Frank's study, surrounded by 40 years of memories and the weight of our new reality. "Grandma Rose," he said softly, "when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you the way you took care of me. I'm going to be the kind of person who shows up." "Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to worry about that." "Yes, I do," he said with surprising firmness. "Mommy didn't take care of anybody. She just took. But I'm not like her, am I?" Looking at this remarkable boy, I realized he was absolutely right. He wasn't anything like April at all, and thank God for that. Frank's death left me with the house, a modest life insurance policy, and the full responsibility of raising Michael alone. What I didn't expect was how much stronger it would make both of us, or how it would reveal Michael's true character in ways that amazed me daily. Michael threw himself into his studies with fierce determination that reminded me of a warrior preparing for battle. Despite his ongoing medical challenges, he excelled in everything he touched, particularly in debate and mock trial, where his sharp mind and natural sense of justice shone like a beacon. "I want to be a lawyer," he announced one evening when he was 14, sitting on our front porch and watching the sunset with the kind of peaceful confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Like the ones who help families when people try to hurt them financially or emotionally. By this time, Michael's health had improved dramatically with proper medical management and the stability of a loving home. He still needed special care and monitoring, but he could live a relatively normal life, something that might not have been possible if he'd been shuffled through the foster system after April's abandonment. "That's a wonderful goal," I said, watching this remarkable young man who'd grown tall and serious beyond his years. "You'd make an excellent lawyer. You've got the mind for it, and more importantly, you've got the heart." "I want to help kids whose parents abandon them," he continued with the kind of quiet determination that gives me chills. "And elderly people whose families try to steal from them. People who can't fight back by themselves because they're too young, too old, or too sick to protect themselves from the people who are supposed to love them." You know what's funny? While April was off living her authentic life in Arizona with Marcus, yes, I'd hired a private investigator to make sure she was really gone and not planning some dramatic return. Michael was becoming the kind of person who fought for justice and protected the vulnerable. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Grandma Rose, do you ever wonder if she thinks about me?" It was the first time he'd asked about April in over a year, and I could see he'd been working up the courage to voice this question that had probably been gnawing at him. I considered giving him some comforting lie about how she surely missed him, how she probably thought about him every day, but was just too proud to admit her mistake. But Michael had always deserved honesty from me, and I wasn't going to start lying to him now. "I think your mother thinks about herself, sweetie. All day, every day. Some people are just built that way. They can't see past their own wants and needs long enough to consider anyone else's feelings or welfare. It's not a character flaw they chose. It's more like being born colorblind. Except, instead of not seeing colors, they can't see other people as real human beings deserving of love and consideration." "Good," he said with a finality that surprised me, "because I don't think about her anymore either. You're my family. You and Dad, Paul. She's just nobody. Less than nobody. Actually, because at least most strangers wouldn't deliberately hurt a kid." The dismissal in his voice was so complete, so absolute, that I knew he meant every word. April had lost her son entirely through her own choices, and he'd moved on completely. She was dead to him in every way that mattered. That night, lying in bed, I thought about the profound justice of it all. April had abandoned Michael to chase her own happiness, but in doing so, she'd lost the most precious thing anyone could ever have, the unconditional love of an extraordinary child who would have moved mountains for her if she'd just stayed and tried. Michael graduated valedictorian of his high school class and earned a full scholarship to law school at Georgetown. I was sitting in the front row, tears streaming down my face, when he gave his graduation speech about overcoming adversity and the importance of family that chooses to love you unconditionally. "Family," he said, looking directly at me with those intelligent eyes that missed nothing, "isn't defined by genetics or legal documents. It's defined by who shows up when you need them most, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself, and who loves you not despite your challenges, but because of the strength those challenges have given you. The entire auditorium erupted in applause. But I only had eyes for this remarkable young man who'd grown from a scared, sick little boy into someone who could inspire hundreds of people with his wisdom and resilience. Paul flew in for the ceremony, as he had for every major milestone in Michael's life. He'd never remarried, never had other children, and Michael remained his son in every way that mattered. Their bond had only grown stronger over the years, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation. "Rose," Paul said as we watched Michael accept award after award, "you saved his life. You know that, right? If he'd gone into foster care when April left, if he'd been shuffled between strangers who saw him as a burden instead of a blessing, he saved mine too," I replied, watching Michael shake hands with the principal and smile that radiant smile that lit up every room he entered. After Frank died, Michael gave me a reason to keep going, a purpose that went beyond just surviving. What I didn't tell Paul was the call I'd received earlier that week from a lawyer in Phoenix. April was apparently getting divorced from Marcus. Apparently even yoga instructors get tired of narcissistic partners eventually, and her attorney had been asking pointed questions about Frank's estate and any potential inheritance Michael might be entitled to as Frank's step-grandson. I'd told the lawyer the truth. Frank had left everything to me, and I planned to leave everything to Michael when my time came. There was nothing for April to claim, no legal loophole for her to exploit. But the very fact that she was asking questions after 8 years of complete silence told me everything I needed to know about why she might be suddenly interested in reconnecting with her family. That night, after the graduation party was over and the last guests had left, Michael and I were cleaning up when he brought up something that absolutely floored me. "Grandma Rose, I've been thinking about officially changing my last name, from Morrison to Patterson." April's married name was Morrison. Patterson was my maiden name, the name I'd returned to after Frank's death. "Are you sure, honey? That's a big step. I want the same name as the person who actually raised me," he said with quiet conviction. "Morrison connects me to people who threw me away like garbage. Patterson connects me to you, to real family, to people who choose love over convenience." 2 weeks later, Michael Patterson was his official legal name. When the paperwork was complete, he hugged me tight and whispered, "Now it's official. You're really my family, and I'm really yours." I had no idea then that this name change would become crucial very soon, because April was about to make the biggest miscalculation of her life by assuming the little boy she'd abandoned would still be helpless when she decided she needed him again. I was making Michael's favorite apple pie when the doorbell rang at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Through the peephole, I saw a woman with expensive blonde highlights and designer clothes that screamed money. It took me 3 full seconds to realize I was looking at my own daughter. April stood on my porch like she owned the place, checking her manicured nails with the same impatience she'd shown as a child when she wanted something. 16 years had turned her into exactly what I'd feared, a woman who looked like she'd never suffered a day in her life while other people cleaned up her messes. Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in. And speaking of cats, April was wearing enough designer labels to fund a small country's healthcare system. Funny how someone who claimed to be too poor to visit her dying stepfather suddenly had money for Prada purses and Botox treatments. "Hello, Mother." Her voice was crisp, businesslike, as if she were greeting a bank teller instead of the woman who'd raised her and cleaned up her abandoned child's tears for 16 years. "April." I didn't move to let her in. Call me petty, but after 16 years of silence, she could stand on my porch and explain herself before I invited her into my sanctuary. "May I come in? We need to discuss Frank's estate." Not, "How are you?" Not, "I'm sorry for your loss." Not, "How is my son?" Just straight to money, because of course that's what brought her crawling back. I should have been surprised, but honestly, April being motivated by greed was about as shocking as water being wet. I opened the door wider, and she walked past me into the living room, her eyes immediately scanning everything like a professional appraiser calculating values. She paused at the mantel, where Frank's photos sat next to pictures of Michael at various ages. Graduation, science fairs, debate tournaments, the scholarship ceremony. "You've redecorated," she said, her tone suggesting she found my choices somehow offensive to her refined sensibilities. "People change things when they actually live somewhere," I replied. unable to keep the edge out of my voice. You know, when they stick around long enough to accumulate memories instead of just abandoning ship at the first sign of inconvenience. She turned to face me, and I was struck by how cold her eyes had become. Not just distant, actually cold, like looking at a reptile wearing human skin. Whatever warmth she'd possessed as a young woman had been completely cauterized by years of pure selfishness. "I'll get straight to the point," she said, settling onto my sofa like she belonged there. "I know Frank left you everything, but as his stepdaughter, I believe I have a legal claim to part of the inheritance, especially considering I helped care for him during his final years." The lie was so brazen, so completely detached from reality, that it actually took my breath away. This woman had some serious nerve. "You helped care for him? April, you didn't even come to his funeral. You said you had plans that were more important than burying the man who raised you." "I was going through a difficult divorce at the time. I couldn't travel." Another lie, delivered with the smooth confidence of someone who'd been practicing deception for years. "I knew from my private investigator that she'd been posting Instagram photos from Cabo that weekend, living it up with Marcus while Frank was being lowered into the ground. Besides," she continued, adjusting her designer purse with calculated nonchalance, "I think we both know that inheritance should go to blood family. Not to—" She paused, looking around my living room with barely concealed disgust. "Whatever this situation has become." Whatever this situation has become? I felt my blood pressure rising to dangerous levels. "You mean a loving home where your son was cared for and cherished while you ran off with your boyfriend to find yourself in Arizona?" Her mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something genuinely ugly flash across her face. Not guilt or shame, but irritation that I was bringing up inconvenient facts. "That's ancient history, Mother. I'm here about Frank's money, not to rehash old family drama." "There is no Frank's money, April. There's my money now, and when I die, every penny of it will go to Michael, the grandson you abandoned, the boy who actually loved Frank and was loved by him in return." "Michael?" She actually laughed, and it was the same cruel sound I remembered from that terrible day 16 years ago. "Mother, surely you don't expect me to believe you're leaving Frank's entire estate to some sick kid who isn't even blood related to him." "That's not how inheritance works." Some sick kid. She was talking about her own son like he was a stray animal we'd taken pity on, instead of the remarkable young man who'd overcome everything she'd put him through. "He's not some sick kid, April. He's your son, though I understand why you might have forgotten that detail. And Frank loved him like a grandson, because Frank understood what real family looks like." April waved her hand dismissively, like she was swatting away an annoying fly. "Please, Mother. Frank tolerated him because you insisted on playing martyred grandmother. But legally, I'm Frank's stepdaughter. I have legitimate inheritance rights that supersede whatever sentimental nonsense you've convinced yourself matters." I stared at this beautifully dressed stranger wearing my daughter's face, marveling at how someone could be so completely devoid of basic human decency. "You have no rights here. April, you abandoned your child and never looked back. You didn't visit Frank when he was dying, didn't attend his funeral, haven't called once in 16 years to check on anyone's welfare. You gave up all rights the day you walked out and never came back." "I was young and overwhelmed," she said. Her voice taking on a practiced, rehearsed quality that suggested she'd been workshopping this excuse. "I needed time to find myself, to discover who I really was outside of the suffocating role of mother and wife. Now I'm ready to be part of this family again, to claim my rightful place." "Part of this family again?" I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "April, you don't even know your son's name anymore, not his real name anyway." "Don't be ridiculous. His name is Michael Morrison." She said it with the confidence of someone stating an obvious fact, completely unaware that she was about to be blindsided. "No," I said quietly, savoring this moment of revelation. "His name is Michael Patterson. He legally changed it 3 years ago because he wanted to share my name instead of yours. He said he wanted the same name as the person who actually raised him, who actually loved him unconditionally." For the first time since she'd arrived, April looked genuinely surprised. Not hurt. That would require her to care about something other than herself, but surprised, like she'd just learned that a piece of furniture had rearranged itself. He changed his name? There was something almost offended in her voice, as if Michael had committed some sort of personal slight against her by rejecting her identity. He said Morrison connected him to people who threw him away like garbage, while Patterson connected him to real family, people who choose love over convenience, who show up when it matters, who understand that family is about more than shared DNA. Something flickered across her face, not pain or regret, but something more like territorial irritation, as if Michael was a possession she'd discarded but still somehow owned. "Well, that's easily fixed," she said, with renewed confidence. "A name change doesn't affect biological relationships or inheritance rights. DNA is DNA, regardless of what someone calls themselves. There are no inheritance rights. April, Frank left everything to me, and I'm leaving everything to Michael. End of discussion." I stood up, making it clear this conversation was over. Her carefully maintained composure finally cracked like expensive veneer, revealing the cheap particle board underneath. "That's not fair. I'm his biological daughter. I deserve my share of what he worked for." "You deserve exactly what you earned," I interrupted, my voice rising to match hers. "Which is absolutely nothing. You want to talk about what's fair? Was it fair when you abandoned your sick child? Was it fair when you didn't visit Frank during his final illness? Was it fair when you chose your selfish desires over every responsibility you'd ever accepted?" She stood up abruptly, clutching her designer purse like a weapon, her mask of sophistication completely discarded now. "We'll see about that, Mother. I have lawyers now. Good ones, expensive ones. Frank's estate was worth quite a bit, and I'm entitled to my share, whether you like it or not." "Your share of what? The house you never visited? The love you rejected? The family you abandoned?" The man whose final words were about how proud he was of Michael, and how grateful he was that you'd shown your true colors early enough for us to protect that boy from your toxicity. "Love doesn't pay bills," she snapped. And there it was, the ugly truth of who April really was, laid bare in 5 simple words. "No, but it builds character. Something you might have learned if you'd stuck around long enough to try being a decent human being." She headed for the door, then paused with her hand on the knob, turning back with what I can only describe as predatory curiosity. "Where is he anyway, Michael?" "At work. He's a junior partner at Morrison, Bradley and Associates downtown." I couldn't resist the irony of mentioning that he worked at a firm named Morrison while legally being a Patterson. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up like exclamation points. "A lawyer? The sick kid became a lawyer?" "Yes, and he specializes in family law and elder abuse cases. He's very, very good at protecting vulnerable people from family members who try to take advantage of them." I let that sink in for a moment. He's particularly ruthless when dealing with parents who abandon their children and then try to profit from that abandonment years later. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, and I could see her mental wheels turning, probably calculating whether her lawyer was better than mine. What she didn't know was that she was about to go up against her own son in court, and Michael Patterson was nobody's victim anymore. April left that day, but I knew she'd be back with reinforcements. What I didn't expect was for Michael to come home early from work with a grim expression and a thick manila folder that screamed, "Serious legal trouble ahead." "Grandma Rose," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table where we'd shared so many important conversations over the years. "I need to tell you something. Someone's been investigating you. Our family, Frank's estate, professional investigators, not just casual curiosity." My heart sank like a stone. "April hired investigators to build a case against us." "How did you—" He stopped, studying my face with those sharp lawyer eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "She came here today, didn't she? She finally showed her face after 16 years. I told him everything, her demands, her lies about caring for Frank, her casual dismissal of him as some sick kid, her threats about expensive lawyers and inheritance rights." Michael listened in complete silence, his jaw tightening with each detail until he looked like he was carved from granite. "She called me some sick kid," I finished. "She doesn't even remember that you're her son. Or if she does, she just doesn't care. You're just an obstacle between her and money she thinks she deserves." Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at the folder in his hands with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and absolutely ruthless. When he finally looked up, His eyes held the kind of controlled fury that makes smart people very, very careful. Actually, Grandma Rose, she does remember exactly who I am. That's what makes this situation so interesting. His smile was predatory, the kind that opposing counsel learned to fear in courtrooms. He opened the folder and spread several documents across the table like he was laying out evidence for a jury. Legal papers, financial records, correspondence, investigative reports. My firm handles a lot of inheritance disputes, he explained with professional calm. When someone started digging into our family's financial situation, it raised red flags with our security protocols. So I did some digging of my own, and what I found is absolutely fascinating. What did you discover? April's been planning this assault for months. She hired a private investigator 6 months ago, right after her divorce from Marcus was finalized, and she realized she was going to need money. She's been researching Frank's assets, your financial situation, my career prospects, even my medical history to see if she could use my childhood illness as leverage. I felt physically sick. She's been watching us like prey. More than that, she's been building an elaborate case based on complete fabrications. Look at this. He pointed to a document that made my blood run cold. She's claiming that she maintained regular contact with the family throughout the years, that she contributed financially to my care and education, that she was Frank's primary caregiver during his final illness. But that's all lies. Complete fiction. I know, and I can prove every single lie with documentation. But here's the really interesting part. His expression turned absolutely savage. She made a crucial mistake. She has no idea about the trust. What trust? Michael's smile turned triumphant. The irrevocable trust that Frank established 3 years before he died. The one that protects all his assets from exactly this kind of inheritance challenge. The one that makes me the sole beneficiary with you as the lifetime trustee. I stared at him in complete shock. I don't understand. What trust? Frank was much smarter than we gave him credit for. Grandma Rose. He knew that April might come back someday looking for money. He'd seen her true character, and he wanted to make sure that if anything happened to you, I would be protected from her greed. So he restructured his entire estate to make it legally impossible for her to touch any of it. But why didn't you tell me about this? Because Frank asked me not to until it became necessary. He said you had enough to worry about without thinking about legal complications that might never matter. He wanted you to enjoy your life without looking over your shoulder, waiting for April to show up with her hand out. Tears welled up in my eyes. Even in death, Frank was still protecting us from April's toxicity. There's more, Michael continued, his expression darkening. Her lawyer sent a formal demand letter this afternoon. They're threatening to sue for wrongful denial of inheritance rights and elder abuse through financial manipulation. Can they do that? Can they actually claim I'm abusing you by leaving you Frank's money? Michael's smile turned absolutely lethal. They can try, but I'm going to destroy them so completely in court that other gold-digging relatives will use their case as a cautionary tale. April's about to learn exactly who she abandoned 16 years ago, and it's going to be the most expensive education of her life. The knock came at 7 a.m. sharp 3 weeks later, aggressive and insistent like someone demanding entrance rather than requesting it. I knew before I opened the door that it would be April, but this time she wasn't alone. A thin man in an expensive suit stood beside her, holding a briefcase like armor and wearing the kind of predatory smile that screams, "Personal injury lawyer." "Mrs. Patterson," the man said smoothly, his voice oozing false sincerity. "I'm James Brennan, Mrs. Morrison's attorney. We're here to discuss a reasonable settlement regarding the estate of Franklin Patterson that would avoid the unpleasantness of litigation." "There's nothing to discuss," I said, but my voice shook slightly because lawyers always made me nervous, even when I knew I was in the right. "Mother, please," April said, her tone artificially sweet like poisoned honey. "We're family. Surely we can work this out without involving the courts and making this ugly for everyone involved." That's when Michael appeared behind me, still in his running clothes, but somehow managing to look more intimidating than both of them combined, despite the sweat and casual attire. There's something about a confident man who knows exactly who he is and what he's capable of that makes smart people very careful about their next words. "Actually," Michael said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of winning in courtrooms, I think the courts would be extremely interested in this case, particularly the fraudulent documentation and the attempted exploitation of elderly persons. April's face went completely white. For 16 years, her son had existed in her mind as a sick little boy she could ignore and dismiss. Now she was face to face with a tall, confident man who radiated the kind of controlled power that comes from fighting injustice professionally and winning. "Michael," she whispered, and I could hear genuine shock in her voice. She'd been expecting to intimidate a frail old woman and her disabled grandson. Instead, she was facing someone who specialized in destroying people exactly like her. "Hello, April." Not mom, not mother, just her first name, spoken with the same tone he'd used for a opposing counsel he was about to demolish. "Though I suppose I should say hello, Mrs. Morrison, since we're apparently being formal today." Brennan cleared his throat importantly. "Mr. Morrison, I presume. We've been hoping to speak with you about this inheritance matter." "It's Mr. Patterson," Michael corrected with ice-cold precision. "I legally changed my name years ago to distance myself from people who abandoned me. But you already knew that, didn't you, Mr. Brennan? Just like you knew about the irrevocable trust that makes your entire lawsuit not just pointless, but potentially sanctionable." April's mouth fell open. "Trust fund? What trust fund?" "The irrevocable trust that Franklin Patterson established 3 years before his death," Michael continued, his voice taking on the lecturing tone he used when explaining legal concepts to particularly slow opposing counsel. "The one that places all estate assets beyond the reach of inheritance challenges. The one that names me as the sole beneficiary with Rose Patterson as lifetime trustee. The one that your thorough investigation somehow missed." Brennan's confident expression cracked like cheap veneer. "That trust was never properly disclosed during the probate process." "During what probate process?" Michael interrupted with devastating calm. "During the 16 years my client was completely absent from this family? During the zero contact she maintained with the deceased? During the funeral she didn't attend because she had more important plans? Your client?" April looked confused and increasingly panicked. "Yes, I'm representing Mrs. Rose Patterson in this matter. Pro bono, of course, since she's family. Real family. The family that stayed, that cared, that actually earned the love and respect she's trying to steal through fraudulent legal action." "You can't represent her," Brennan protested, finally showing some genuine alarm. "There's a clear conflict of interest." "Actually, there isn't. Mrs. Patterson and I have completely aligned interests, protecting Frank's legacy from parasitic relatives who view family relationships as financial opportunities. But please, continue with your lawsuit. I'm looking forward to deposing Mrs. Morrison about her alleged care for the deceased." April finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak. "You can't do this. I'm his biological daughter. Blood matters more than legal documents." "Blood doesn't override behavior in inheritance law," Michael said with the kind of calm that precedes total destruction. "Frank left his estate to people who actually loved him, who were present during his final illness, who mourned his death genuinely. People who earned their place in his will through years of devotion rather than genetic accidents." "But I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Michael said, and his smile was absolutely terrifying. "Because everything you say can and will be used against you in the countersuit I'm filing for elder abuse, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." April looked like she was going to cry, but not from sadness. From pure rage that her carefully planned con was falling apart. "This isn't over," she said, but her voice lacked conviction now. Michael stepped forward, and suddenly he didn't look anything like the sick little boy she'd abandoned. He looked like exactly what he was, a successful attorney who specialized in protecting vulnerable people from family members who prey on them. "You're absolutely right," he said quietly. "It's not over. Because I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are, starting with the state bar, which takes a very dim view of attorneys who help clients commit fraud." 6 months later, I was reading the final court decision when Michael came home with champagne and the biggest smile I'd seen since his law school graduation. The judge hadn't just dismissed April's case. He'd eviscerated it so thoroughly that legal scholars were already citing it as precedent. "It's over," Michael announced, setting the champagne on the kitchen table with the satisfaction of someone who just won the legal equivalent of the Super Bowl. April's case was dismissed with prejudice. The judge called it frivolous and without merit and ordered her to pay our legal fees plus damages for attempted fraud. I set down the court papers, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. So it's really finished? She can't try again? Better than finished. The judge's ruling sets legal precedent about inheritance abandonment. April's case is now cited law that protects families from gold-digging relatives who try to use the courts to harass people they abandoned. Her greed literally made it harder for other parasites to pull the same scam. We sat on the front porch, where we'd shared so many important conversations over the years, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Michael was 34 now, successful and confident, with a serious girlfriend named Sarah, who treated me like a beloved grandmother and understood exactly how special our family bond was. "Do you think she'll try again?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "No, she's done, finished." Brennan dropped her after the judge's ruling, and word travels fast in legal circles. No reputable attorney will touch a case like hers now. Plus, she owes us $47,000 in legal fees and damages. Her little adventure in greed cost her more money than she could have inherited even if she'd won. I thought about April, probably back in Phoenix, trying to figure out her next move now that her grand plan had exploded in her face. Part of me, a very small part, almost felt sorry for her. She'd gambled everything on her ability to manipulate and charm her way into money she'd never earned. And she'd lost spectacularly against the very son she'd discarded. "Grandma Rose," Michael said softly, "I want you to know something important. April leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Oh, sweetheart." "No, I mean it completely. If she'd stayed, I would have grown up thinking that love was conditional, that people only care about you when you're convenient and healthy and easy to manage. Instead, I got to grow up with you, learning that real love means showing up every single day, especially when it's hard." Tears stung my eyes. "You saved me too, you know. After Frank died, you gave me a reason to keep fighting, a purpose that went beyond just surviving each day." "We saved each other," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand with the same gentle strength he'd shown since he was 8 years old. And now April knows exactly what she threw away. A son who would have loved her unconditionally, and a mother who would have supported her through anything. She chose to walk away from all of that, and now she has to live with the consequences forever. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. April's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering, but curiosity won. "Mother, Her voice was quiet, smaller than I'd heard it in years. I wanted to apologize. "For what?" "Specifically?" I asked, because after everything she'd put us through, vague apologies weren't going to cut it. There was a long pause, and I could almost hear her struggling to find words that might undo 16 years of damage. "For everything. For leaving Michael when he needed me. For not being there when Frank died. For trying to steal money I didn't deserve. For being the kind of person who could abandon her own child." "Apology noted," I said calmly. I didn't forgive her. Some things can't be forgiven, only acknowledged. But I could recognize her words without absolving her actions. Could I maybe visit sometime? Just to see how you're doing? To try to make amends? I looked across the living room where Michael was helping me hang new curtains, laughing at something Sarah had said about my decorating choices. My real family, the family that chose to love each other every single day, through medical crises and legal battles, and all the ordinary difficulties that make life meaningful when you face them together. "No, April. I think it's better if you don't. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt, and some people, once they show you who they really are, don't get second chances to hurt the people you love." After I hung up, Michael raised an eyebrow. "April." "She wanted to visit, to make amends." "And you said?" "I said no. You don't owe her forgiveness, and I don't owe her access to our lives. She made her choices 16 years ago, and we've all had to live with the consequences." Michael nodded approvingly. "Good. You don't owe her anything. Not forgiveness, not access, not another opportunity to hurt you or manipulate our family." That night, Lying in bed, I thought about the strange, perfect justice of it all. April's abandonment had broken my heart 16 years ago, but it had also given me the greatest gift of my life, the chance to raise an extraordinary young man who understood that real family isn't about blood relations or legal obligations. It's about who shows up, who stays, who loves you enough to fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. April had thrown away the most precious things in life for a man who eventually left her anyway, and now she was alone while I was surrounded by people who truly cherished me. In the end, her greed had cost her everything that actually mattered, while our love had given us everything worth having. And that, I thought with deep satisfaction, was exactly the ending this story deserved.